Okay, we're going to look at questions number 1 and 2 on the Math 1105 Test 3 review from Mr. Salick. Alright, so let's go ahead. I'm actually going to work questions 1 and 2 on the same video because they pretty much are going to work the same way. Let's look at the problem so that you understand why I kind of lumped them together on one video. Alright, come with me. And here is our first question. Well, this is an equation, and we're asked to solve that equation for x. Now, first of all, you notice because it's degree 2, it's a quadratic equation. The degree always tells you the maximum number of answers, so we would expect at most 2 answers to this equation. Also notice that in this particular equation, it's already in standard form. B is 0. In other words, there's no x term. When there is no x term, the best property to use to solve that quadratic equation is probably the square root property. And to do that, we need to get x squared alone. So my first step is going to be to add 36 to both sides. So let's do that. And now x squared has to be completely alone before we can apply the square root property. So let's divide each side by 6 to make that happen. So we now have x squared is equal to 6. This is analogous to like priming the walls before you paint them. It's a good analogy. If you're painting over a dark color, you've got to put a primer coat on. Well, before you can use the square root property, you have to get it in the right form. And that would be something squared equals a constant. And now we're actually ready to do the painting, i.e. to use the square root property. If x squared is equal to 6, the square root property tells me that x is equal to plus or minus the square root of the constant. So I have 2 answers to this problem, a positive square root of 6 and a negative square root of 6, and we're done. So we applied the square root property. Now when I look at example number 2, I notice that it's the same thing. I'm solving a quadratic equation, which is an equation of degree 2. If I want to solve this equation, I notice that b is 0. In other words, there's no x term. So what I'm going to do again is I'm going to prime my walls. That means I'm going to get my x squared alone. X squared is equal to negative 4. And now we apply the square root property. If x squared is equal to a constant, then x is equal to plus or minus the square root of that constant. Now something that hopefully you'll notice here, when you have a negative under a square root, that is not a real number. That is going to turn out to be a complex number. And remember that the square root of negative 4 is going to turn out, I'll basically show the steps. This is really what's happening. The square root of 4, of course, is 2, and the square root of negative 1 by definition is I. So my answers to this quadratic equation are not real. They're complex. We have a positive 2i and a negative 2i. And we're done.